At 3 a.m., my wife secretly copied my credit card details while I was asleep. In the next morning, I noticed $90,000 worth of charges on luxury goods and flights to Europe with her. A week later, she returned, flaunting her purchases and saying with a mocking smile, "Thanks for the upgrade." I burst out laughing because the credit card she used. Let me tell you something about insomnia. It's like having a really crappy superpower. You get to see all the weird stuff that happens when normal people are unconscious. But instead of fighting crime, you're just lying there wondering why your wife is acting like she's auditioning for the Real Housewives of wherever the hell. My name is Marcus Hill, and I'm 36 years old, which apparently makes me boring, according to my wife. I work in cybersecurity, and before you roll your eyes and picture some pale guy in a basement surrounded by empty energy drink cans, let me stop you right there. I run digital fraud training for Fortune 500 companies. I'm the guy who teaches executives how not to fall for Nigerian prince emails and why clicking on hot singles in your area isn't a solid business strategy. It's actually pretty decent work, pays well, keeps me sharp, and gives me some killer stories about corporate stupidity. But here's the thing about being good at spotting fraud professionally. You start noticing patterns everywhere. And lately, the biggest pattern I've been noticing is in my own damn house. Jasmine used to be the light of my life. I'm talking Disney movie-level romance here. She'd laugh at my terrible cybersecurity jokes, and trust me, they're awful, bring me coffee when I was working late, and actually seemed to enjoy spending time with me. We'd binge-watch Netflix series, debate whether pineapple belongs on pizza, it doesn't, fight me, and plan these cute little weekend getaways to nowhere special. Life was good. Life was simple. But over the past 2 years, something shifted. And I don't mean like, oh, we've grown apart shifted. I'm talking full-on personality transplant. Suddenly, everything about our life was basic. Our apartment was too small. My job was not ambitious enough. My car, a perfectly reliable Honda Civic that's never once left me stranded, was embarrassing. It started small. Little comments here and there. Sarah's husband just bought her a new BMW. Did you see Mike's promotion? Now they can afford that house in Westchester. Maybe you should think about switching companies, Marcus. You've been there forever. Look, I get it. Everyone wants nice things. Hell, I want nice things too. But I also want to sleep at night without worrying about whether I can make my mortgage payment. Call me crazy, but financial stability is kind of sexy when you're an adult. Then Brandon showed up. Oh, Brandon. Where do I even start with this guy? He's Jasmine's friend from the gym. And yes, I'm using air quotes because anytime your wife starts talking about her friend from anywhere, you better start paying attention. Brandon drives a Porsche, wears watches that cost more than most people's cars, and apparently has never met a protein shake he didn't like. He's also got that whole entrepreneur vibe going on, which in my experience usually means either trust fund baby or really good at hiding where the money actually comes from. Jasmine started mentioning Brandon a lot. Brandon says this. Brandon thinks that. Brandon took his girlfriend to this amazing restaurant. It was like listening to a broken record, except the song was Reasons Why Your Husband Sucks on repeat. The gym membership was just the beginning. Suddenly Jasmine needed new workout clothes, expensive ones. Then she needed a better phone because hers was too slow for her fitness apps. Then came the skincare routine that cost more than my monthly car payment. Each purchase came with a story about how Brandon's girlfriend had recommended it, or how she'd seen it in Brandon's social media, or how Brandon had mentioned it in passing. I'm not stupid. I know what this looked like. But here's the thing about being married. You want to trust your partner. You want to believe that when they say they're just friends with someone, they mean it. You want to believe that all those late-night gym sessions are actually about fitness and not something else entirely. But then came that night, 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm lying there staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing a presentation I had to give the next morning about phishing scams. Ironic, right? When I felt the bed shift. Jasmine was getting up. Now, this wasn't unusual by itself. She'd been having trouble sleeping lately, stress from work, she said. So getting up to use the bathroom or grab some water wasn't weird. But something about the way she moved was different. Careful, deliberate, like she was trying not to wake me up. I kept my eyes closed and listened. I heard her feet on the hardwood floor, moving away from the bedroom. Then I heard the soft click of the front door closing. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I lay there for about 10 minutes, running through possibilities. Maybe she couldn't sleep and went for a walk. Maybe she needed something from her car. Maybe she was meeting a friend who was having some kind of crisis. There were plenty of innocent explanations. But my gut, the same gut that had helped me catch dozens of corporate fraud cases, was telling me something different. I got up and looked out the window. Her car was gone. She came back around 5 a.m., slipping back into bed like nothing had happened. When I woke up for real a couple hours later, she was already in the shower, humming some song I didn't recognize. "Sleep well?" I asked when she came out. "Like a baby," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. That morning, as I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and pretending to read emails on my phone, I realized something that made my stomach drop. All those years of training executives to spot the signs of fraud, all those seminars about recognizing suspicious behavior, all those case studies about people who thought they were smarter than the system, I'd been living with it all along. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The funny thing is, I should have been furious. I should have confronted her right there. But instead, I found myself thinking about work, about all those corporate investigations I'd been part of, about patience and evidence, and letting people hang themselves with their own rope. I had no idea that by the next morning, Jasmine was going to hand me all the evidence I'd ever need. You know that feeling when your phone starts blowing up at 6 a.m. and your first thought is either someone died or I'm about to get fired? Well, try waking up to 47 notifications and realizing it's somehow both worse and better than either of those scenarios. I'm talking about the kind of wake-up call that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your life, your marriage, and whether the universe has a really twisted sense of humor. Because let me tell you, what happened next was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, except I was somehow both the conductor and the guy tied to the tracks. My phone was practically vibrating off the nightstand. Ding, buzz, ding, buzz, like some demented electronic woodpecker that had way too much coffee. I grabbed it with one eye still glued shut, expecting to see the usual suspects. Work emails from overseas clients, maybe a few spam messages about extending my car warranty. Spoiler alert, I don't want to extend it. Or possibly my mother asking if I'm eating enough vegetables. Instead, I saw something that made me sit up so fast I got a head rush. Banking alerts. Lots of them. Not just any banking alerts, mind you. These were coming from my business account, the one I use for my cybersecurity consulting work. The account that's connected to all my fraud training systems. The account that, until about 6 hours ago, had been sitting pretty with a nice, stable balance. I fumbled with my banking app, my fingers suddenly feeling like they belonged to someone else. The screen loaded, and I just stared at it. Then I blinked hard and stared again, because surely this was some kind of glitch. $90,000. $90,000. Gone. Just gone. But not just gone, specifically spent. On what, you ask? Oh, buckle up, Buttercup, because this is where it gets interesting. First up, a Cartier bracelet. Not just any Cartier bracelet, mind you. We're talking about the kind that costs more than most people's cars. The kind that comes with its own security guard and probably requires a background check to even look at. $22,000. For a bracelet. A bracelet. Then there were the flights. 3 of them. All first class. All to Europe. Paris, Barcelona, Monaco. Because apparently when you're spending someone else's money, economy class is for peasants. Each ticket cost more than I spend on groceries in 6 months. Designer bags came next. Hermes, Louis Vuitton, Chanel. It was like someone had decided to single-handedly support the entire luxury goods industry. Each bag cost enough to feed a small village, and there were 5 of them. 5. Hotel reservations in Monaco. Not just any hotel, either. We're talking about the kind of place where they probably have someone whose only job is to polish the doorknobs. The presidential suite, naturally, because why go halfway when you're committing felony fraud? But wait, there's more. Because this shopping spree from hell also included spa treatments, restaurant reservations at Michelin-starred establishments, and, my personal favorite, a yacht rental. A freaking yacht. Because apparently my hard-earned money was just burning a hole in someone's pocket. I sat there staring at my phone like it was speaking ancient Sumerian. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake, some cosmic computer error that would be sorted out with a simple phone call to customer service. Then I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice water. The name on the transactions wasn't mine. It was Jasmine's. Now, Here's where a normal person might start hyperventilating. Here's where most people would be calling their bank, their lawyer, and possibly the FBI, all while having a full-scale panic attack. Here's where any sane individual would be wondering how the hell their spouse had gotten access to their business account and whether their marriage was officially over. But remember, I'm not most people. I'm a cybersecurity expert who specializes in fraud detection. And as I scrolled through those transactions, something clicked in my brain. Something that made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I got up, carefully, because I was still feeling a little dizzy from the shock, and walked to the kitchen. No Jasmine. Just like every morning for the past few weeks, she was mysteriously absent from our usual coffee and small talk routine. But there was a note on the counter, written in her perfectly neat handwriting on one of our wedding stationery cards. The irony was not lost on me. It said, "Taking a little trip. Don't wait up. Jay. Taking a little trip. With my money. To Europe. First class." That's when it hit me. That's when the pieces of this absolutely insane puzzle started falling into place, and I realized that my wife, my sweet, loving, the light of my life, wife, had just tried to rob me blind. But here's the kicker, the part that made me start laughing like a maniac standing alone in my kitchen at 6:30 a.m. The credit card she used wasn't real. Let me explain. In my line of work, I create dummy accounts and fake credit cards all the time. They're used for fraud training, teaching corporate executives how to spot suspicious transactions, how to recognize when someone's trying to game the system. These cards look real, they act real when you swipe them, but they're connected to monitoring systems that track every single transaction for training purposes. The card Jasmine had somehow gotten hold of? It was one of my training cards. A card specifically designed to trigger alerts, to create paper trails, to document every single fraudulent transaction for educational purposes. In other words, my dear wife hadn't just stolen from me. She'd stolen a fake card that was designed to catch thieves, and every single one of those transactions was being logged, monitored, and documented by both banking security systems and federal fraud detection algorithms. She'd essentially just committed the perfect crime against a system specifically designed to catch people committing that exact crime. I should have been furious. I should have been heartbroken. I should have been calling lawyers and planning my divorce. Instead, I smiled. I smiled so wide my face hurt. Because Jasmine had just walked into the most beautiful trap she could have possibly imagined, and she had absolutely no idea what was coming for her. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, they clearly never met someone in cybersecurity, because we prefer our revenge served with detailed documentation, multiple backup systems, and enough digital evidence to make a prosecutor weep tears of joy. The first person I called was Tanya Rodriguez, my best friend since college, and currently one of the most cutthroat legal consultants in Manhattan. Tanya's the kind of lawyer who could probably negotiate world peace during her lunch break and still have time to destroy someone's entire legal existence before dessert. She's also the only person I know who finds legal loopholes more entertaining than Netflix. "Marcus, it's barely 7 a.m. She answered on the second ring, sounding surprisingly alert for someone who usually doesn't acknowledge the existence of morning until at least 10 a.m. Someone better be dead, or you better have discovered oil in your backyard. "Tanya, you're not gonna believe what Jasmine just did," I said, unable to keep the weird mixture of disbelief and excitement out of my voice. There was a pause. Then, oh God, did she finally leave you for that gym bro? Because honestly, I've been preparing the divorce papers in my head for months. "Better," I said. "She stole from me." Define stole. Like, she took your Netflix password. Are we talking full-blown grand larceny here? $90,000, Tanya, in one night, for a European vacation with Brandon. The silence on the other end was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard what sounded like coffee being spit out, followed by some very creative Spanish curse words that I'm pretty sure would make her grandmother wash her mouth out with soap. "I'm sorry, what now? She stole 90 grand? From you? Marcus, are you having a stroke? Should I call 911? "Wait, it gets better," I said, practically bouncing on my toes with excitement. "The credit card she used? It wasn't real." Another pause. Then Tanya started laughing. Not just regular laughing. I'm talking about the kind of maniacal laughter that probably frightened her neighbors and made her cat question its living situation. "Wait, wait, wait. She gasped between fits of laughter. You're telling me that your sweet, innocent wife who can't figure out how to work the TV remote, somehow managed to steal one of your dummy training cards. That's exactly what I'm telling you. The same dummy cards that are specifically designed to catch people committing fraud? The very same. Oh my God, Marcus. Oh my God. This is like watching someone try to rob a bank by accidentally walking into the FBI headquarters. This is beautiful. This is art. Tanya's reaction was exactly what I needed to hear, because it confirmed what I was already thinking. Jasmine had just handed us the kind of case that law students would study for years to come. The kind of case that gets turned into cautionary tales about what happens when you try to outsmart someone who literally designs systems to catch smart people doing dumb things. Okay, let me think, Tanya said, and I could practically hear her lawyer brain shifting into high gear. Every transaction is being logged, right? Timestamps, locations, everything. Real-time monitoring, I confirmed. Plus, since it's connected to my business fraud training systems, everything's being documented for federal compliance purposes. Marcus, I think I love you. In a completely professional, non-romantic way that won't complicate our friendship or my relationship with David. The feeling's mutual. So what's our next move? Our next move? We sit back and watch her dig her own grave. But first, you need to call Agent Rivera. Agent Rivera. Now there's a name I hadn't thought about in months. Special Agent Carlos Rivera, FBI Financial Crimes Division, and quite possibly the most thorough investigator I'd ever worked with. We'd collaborated on several corporate fraud cases over the past few years, and the guy was like a bloodhound when it came to following money trails. You think he'll take the case? I asked. Marcus, you're handing him a federal fraud case where the perpetrator is literally documenting her own crimes in real time using a system designed specifically to catch federal fraud. Rivera's probably going to want to nominate you for some kind of public service award. She was right. I scrolled through my contacts and found Rivera's number. It was still early, but FBI agents are like cybersecurity consultants. We're used to getting calls at weird hours about people doing stupid things with other people's money. Rivera, he answered on the first ring, sounding like he'd been awake for hours. Agent Rivera, it's Marcus Hill. Remember me? We worked on the Johnson Industries case last year. Marcus, of course. Don't tell me someone else tried to embezzle money using fake invoices. Not exactly, I said, but I've got something you're going to find very interesting. I explained the situation, Jasmine's mysterious behavior, the $90,000 in charges, the European vacation, and most importantly, the fact that she'd somehow gotten hold of one of my training cards. The silence on Rivera's end was different from Tanya's. This was the silence of a professional predator realizing that prey had just walked into his trap. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Rivera said slowly. Your wife stole what she thought was your credit card, used it to fund an international spending spree, and the card she stole is actually connected to federal fraud monitoring systems. That's the situation, yes. And every transaction is being logged with timestamps, geolocation data, and merchant verification? Every single one. Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't contact your wife. Don't confront her about this. Don't do anything that might tip her off. Can you do that? Absolutely. Good. Because what your wife has done isn't just theft. It's federal fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access to financial training systems. If she's documenting this vacation on social media, which, let's be honest, people always do, she's basically creating a real-time confession. That's when it hit me. Jasmine's Instagram, her Facebook, her Snapchat. She documented everything. Every meal, every outfit, every sunset. There was no way she was going to spend $90,000 of what she thought was my money without broadcasting it to the entire world. Rivera, I said, I think you're going to want to see her social media accounts. Already planning on it. Marcus, your wife just committed what might be the most well-documented case of fraud I've ever seen. All we have to do now is let her finish painting the target on her own back. We agreed to meet the next day to go over all the evidence. As I hung up, I realized something that made me smile even wider. Jasmine thought she was finally getting the luxury life she deserved. She had no idea she was actually getting the federal prison sentence she'd earned. If there's one thing I've learned from years of investigating corporate fraud, it's that criminals always make the same mistake. They can't help but show off. It's like some kind of genetic defect that forces people to document their crimes on social media, because apparently committing felonies isn't satisfying unless you get at least 50 likes and a bunch of heart eye emojis. Jasmine, bless her criminally stupid heart, was no exception. For the next week, my wife turned into a one-woman tourism board for luxury European destinations. And I had a front-row seat to the most expensive self-incrimination show in history, all thanks to the miracle of modern social media. It started the moment her plane landed in Paris. The first post hit Instagram at 8:42 a.m. European time. A perfectly filtered selfie of Jasmine in what was obviously a first-class airline seat, champagne flute in hand, with the caption "First-class state of mind airplane clinking glasses #living my best life #upgraded." Now, here's the thing about first-class airline seats. They're distinctive. Each airline has their own design, their own color scheme, their own little luxury touches. And thanks to my obsessive attention to detail, occupational hazard, I could tell she was on Air France Flight 007 to Charles de Gaulle, Seat 2A, which had cost exactly $8,247 according to my banking alerts. But wait, there's more. Because apparently one incriminating post wasn't enough for my soon-to-be ex-wife. Next came a video of her walking through the Louvre, wearing what I recognized as a brand-new Hermes scarf that had cost $1,200. She was doing that thing where you hold the camera at arm's length and pretend you're talking to your followers like you're some kind of lifestyle influencer. "Hey guys," she chirped at the camera, her voice pitched just a little too high with excitement. "Just living my dream in Paris. Sometimes you have to invest in yourself, you know? Sometimes you have to take what you deserve." She did a little twirl, showing off a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The comments section was pure gold. Her sister asking, "OMG, how can you afford this?" Her college roommate writing, "Girl, did Marcus get a promotion?" Her gym friends losing their minds over her sudden lifestyle upgrade. But the real star of this digital crime documentation was Brandon. Oh, Brandon. Mr. Entrepreneur himself was lurking in the background of almost every shot, like some kind of designer-wearing photobombing ghost. There he was in her spontaneous cafe selfie in Montmartre, pretending to read a newspaper while wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my car payment. There he was again in her candid shot at the Eiffel Tower, checking his phone with studied nonchalance. And there he was in her rooftop dinner video, accidentally clinking champagne glasses just within frame while she gushed about following your dreams and taking chances. The guy wasn't even trying to be subtle. In one particularly ridiculous post, Jasmine filmed herself getting a couple's massage with Brandon, naturally, while talking about treating yourself to the luxury you deserve. The spa was the George V, which I knew charged about $800 per person for their signature treatment. But the real kicker? You could literally see Brandon in the background getting his own massage, and at one point, he actually waved at the camera. Tanya was screenshot ing everything, of course. Every post, every story, every comment. We'd created a shared folder that was quickly becoming the most thorough documentation of someone's criminal stupidity I'd ever seen. "This is better than Christmas morning," Tanya texted me after Jasmine posted a video tour of her hotel suite in Paris. She's literally narrating her own fraud case. And she was. In the video, Jasmine panned across a hotel room that was clearly a premium suite. I looked it up, $2,000 per night, talking about how life is too short to settle for basic accommodations, and how sometimes the universe rewards you for being brave enough to go after what you want. The universe. She thought the universe had rewarded her with my stolen money. From Paris, they moved to Barcelona, and the post got even more ridiculous. Shopping hauls from Los Ramblas, where she showed off bags from every high-end boutique in the city. Dinner videos from restaurants that required reservations 3 months in advance. A particularly nauseating post where she and Brandon were on some kind of yacht, the one that had cost me $5,000 to rent for the day. Toasting with champagne while she talked about surrounding yourself with people who elevate your energy. Agent Rivera was having the time of his life. "Marcus," he called me on day 5. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen someone document their own federal crimes with this level of detail." She's basically created a prosecutorial roadmap. "Gets better," I told him. "Check out her latest Instagram story." The latest story was Jasmine and Brandon at some fancy Barcelona nightclub, and she was literally holding up the Cartier bracelet, the $22,000 Cartier bracelet, talking about investing in timeless pieces that make you feel like the queen you are. But the absolute crown jewel of her criminal documentation came on day 6, when they arrived in Monaco. The post that made Tanya actually call me because she was laughing too hard to text properly. It was a video selfie of Jasmine in what was clearly the presidential suite of the Hotel Hermitage. I'd looked that up too, for $1,000 per night, holding up her phone to show the view of Monte Carlo Harbor. But here's the beautiful part. She'd left the hotel welcome packet on the table behind her, clearly visible in the shot, with both her name and Brandon's name on it. New life, new me, her caption read. Sometimes you have to burn bridges to light the way to your destiny. Fire sparkles, hashtag no regrets, hashtag living authentically, hashtag upgraded. Burn bridges to light the way to your destiny. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Because while Jasmine was busy living her authentic life on stolen money, Agent Rivera was busy matching every single post to transaction records, hotel security footage, and merchant verification data. Every selfie had metadata showing exactly when and where it was taken. Every purchase was time-stamped and geotagged. Every restaurant check-in was cross-referenced with credit card processing records. She wasn't just documenting her vacation. She was building her own federal case, one Instagram post at a time. You know that moment in every heist movie where the criminal thinks they've pulled off the perfect crime? Where they're walking around all smug and confident, maybe lighting a cigar or counting their money, completely oblivious to the fact that the FBI is already surrounding the building. Yeah, well, real life is way more satisfying than the movies, especially when the criminal is your own wife, and she's about to walk face first into the most beautiful karma delivery in recorded history. It was a Thursday evening when Jasmine decided to make her grand return. I'd been tracking her flight status obsessively, not because I missed her, mind you, but because Agent Rivera wanted to know exactly when our star witness would be available for questioning. Air France Flight 008, landing at JFK at 6:47 p.m., right on schedule. I'd spent the week preparing for this moment. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, except for the small army of legal documents I'd hidden in my office and the recording equipment Tanya had helped me set up. Nothing fancy, just a few strategically placed devices that would capture audio and video of whatever confession Jasmine was about to deliver. Because here's the thing about criminals who think they've gotten away with something. They can't help but brag about it. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, pretending to work on a cybersecurity proposal while actually reviewing the evidence file that Agent Rivera had compiled. 7 days of meticulously documented fraud, complete with timestamps, geolocation data, and enough social media evidence to make a prosecutor's career. The woman had literally created a multimedia presentation of her own felony charges. At 8:15 p.m., I heard the key in the lock. The door opened, and in walked my wife, looking like she'd just stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Designer luggage, expensive sunglasses perched on her head despite it being dark outside, and this glow that people get when they think they've outsmarted the entire world. But here's what really got me. The attitude. The way she moved through our apartment like she owned not just the place, but the entire universe. Like she'd just conquered Europe and come home to claim her rightful throne. She dumped her designer bags on the couch, 5 of them, each one worth more than most people's monthly salary, with the casual disregard of someone who'd never had to work for anything in her life. The bags hit the leather with a series of expensive thuds that somehow managed to sound both luxurious and criminal at the same time. Then came the shoes. Louboutin heels that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, kicked off with theatrical flair and left wherever they landed. Because when you're living off stolen money, apparently basic courtesy becomes optional. "Marcus," she called out, like she was greeting an old friend instead of the husband she'd just robbed blind. "Honey, I'm home." I looked up from my laptop, putting on my best confused husband expression. "Hey, babe, how was your trip?" And that's when she said it. The line that would probably be quoted in her sentencing hearing, the words that would follow her through whatever prison they eventually sent her to. "Thanks for the upgrade, babe." She actually said that, with a straight face, while standing in our living room, surrounded by evidence of the $90,000 she'd stolen from me. Then she laughed. Not a guilty laugh, not an embarrassed laugh, but the kind of laugh you hear from someone who thinks they've just pulled off the greatest practical joke in history. What upgrade? I asked, because I'm apparently a better actor than I thought. Oh, come on, she said, waving her hand dismissively. The credit card? The European vacation? Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. And there it was. Confession number 1, delivered with the confidence of someone who thought her husband was too stupid to figure out what had happened. But she wasn't done. Oh no, Jasmine was just getting started. She plopped down on the couch next to her stolen designer bags and launched into what I can only describe as the most incriminating monologue I've ever heard outside of a courtroom drama. I mean, at first I wasn't sure, she continued, examining her new manicure, which had probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. But then I figured, hey, if Marcus is finally ready to step up and provide the lifestyle I deserve, who am I to say no? Step up. Provide the lifestyle she deserved. With stolen money. From a fraud training account. Besides, she went on, completely oblivious to the fact that she was essentially dictating her own arrest warrant. It's not like you were using that card anyway. I mean, when was the last time you took me somewhere nice? When was the last time you bought me something that didn't come from Target? I just stared at her. This woman, this person I'd been married to for 5 years, was sitting in our living room, surrounded by the evidence of her crimes, casually talking about how I'd never spent enough money on her. The cognitive dissonance was so strong I was getting a headache. And Brandon was right, she continued, because of course Brandon had to make an appearance in her confession. He said that sometimes you have to take what you deserve in life. Sometimes you have to show people what you're worth. Brandon was right. The same Brandon who'd mysteriously had enough money to accompany her on a $90,000 European shopping spree. The same Brandon who'd been conveniently available for every expensive restaurant, every luxury hotel, every first-class flight. You should have seen us in Paris, Jasmine gushed, pulling out her phone to scroll through what I already knew were dozens of incriminating photos. We looked like we belonged there, you know? Like we were meant for that kind of life. We. She kept saying we like this had been some kind of romantic getaway instead of a felony fraud spree with her boyfriend. The suite in Monaco was incredible, she continued, apparently unable to stop herself from detailing every expensive moment of her crime spree. 24-hour room service, champagne whenever we wanted it, that amazing view of the harbor. I felt like a real person for the first time in years. A real person. Because apparently being married to me had made her feel like some kind of fake person, and only stolen money could make her feel authentic. I was recording every word, of course. Every casual admission, every detail about Brandon, every reference to the specific hotels and restaurants I'd already verified through transaction records. She was building the prosecution's case one sentence at a time, and she seemed to think she was just sharing vacation highlights. You know what the best part was? She asked, leaning forward with this conspiratorial smile. I finally felt like I was living up to my potential, like I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. The person she was always meant to be, apparently, was a federal criminal. But I wasn't about to tell her that. Not yet. Instead, I just smiled back and said, "That's great, honey. I'm glad you had fun." Because tomorrow, Agent Rivera would be knocking on our door, and Jasmine would discover exactly what kind of upgrade she'd really earned. If there's one thing criminals never learn, it's when to shut up. They get so high off their own success that they can't help but keep talking, keep explaining, keep digging that hole deeper and deeper until they're basically building their own prison cell one word at a time. Jasmine, apparently, had missed that particular life lesson. For the next 3 hours, I got treated to the most detailed confession I'd ever heard outside of a police interrogation room. And the beautiful part? She thought she was just sharing vacation stories with her husband. She had absolutely no clue that every word coming out of her mouth was being recorded for federal prosecutors. Oh my God, Marcus, you should have seen the looks on people's faces when we walked into that restaurant in Barcelona, she gushed, curled up on the couch like we were having some kind of cozy catch-up session. The maitre d' practically bowed when he saw Brandon's watch. It was like we were celebrities or something. Brandon's watch. The same watch that had been visible in about 15 of her Instagram posts, which Agent Rivera had already cross-referenced with luxury retailer databases. The same watch that probably cost more than most people's cars, and raised some very interesting questions about where exactly Brandon's money came from. And the shopping, she continued, gesturing to the designer bags scattered around our living room like evidence markers at a crime scene. Marcus, I've never felt so powerful. Like, when you can just walk into Hermes and buy whatever you want without even looking at the price tags. That's what real freedom feels like. Real freedom. She thought stealing $90,000 from her husband represented freedom. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife and served it for dinner. But she wasn't done. Oh no, my dear criminal wife was just getting warmed up. Brandon kept saying how natural I looked in that world, she said, her eyes getting that dreamy expression people get when they're remembering what they think was the best week of their lives. He said I was meant for luxury, that I deserved to be treated like a queen. Brandon said. Everything came back to Brandon. Brandon with his mysterious money. Brandon with his designer lifestyle. Brandon who had somehow convinced my wife that stealing from her husband was some kind of empowerment journey. You know what he told me on the yacht? She asked, not waiting for an answer. He said that most people are too scared to take what they deserve. He said that successful people don't wait for permission to live their best lives. The yacht. The $5,000 yacht rental that I'd watched her document in real time on Instagram, complete with champagne toasts and sunset selfies. All of it paid for with what she thought was my money. And he was right. Jasmine continued, getting more animated as she talked. I spent so many years just settling, accepting this boring life, this basic apartment, your basic job. But that week I finally felt like myself. My basic job. The job that paid for this apartment, that kept the lights on, that funded the very bank account she'd stolen from. But apparently cybersecurity consulting wasn't glamorous enough for her newly elevated standards. The suite in Monaco was the best part, she said, pulling out her phone to show me photos I'd already seen thanks to her very public social media documentation. 24-hour butler service, champagne on tap, that incredible view of the harbor. Brandon said it was the kind of place where powerful people make powerful decisions. She scrolled through photo after photo, each one more incriminating than the last. There she was in a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. There was Brandon in the background, raising a champagne glass in what looked suspiciously like a victory toast. There they were together on the balcony, looking out over Monte Carlo like they owned the entire principality. And the restaurants, she gushed, apparently unable to stop herself from documenting every detail of her crime spree. Marcus, we ate at places that have waiting lists longer than a year. Places where they know your name and your preferences before you even sit down. That's what it feels like to really live. Every restaurant she mentioned, I'd already looked up. Every meal she described, I'd already matched to transaction records. She was giving me a guided tour of her own federal fraud case, complete with timestamps and location data. But the real masterpiece came when she started talking about their last night in Monaco. Brandon took me to this private casino, she said, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a sophisticated whisper. The kind of place where you need connections just to get through the door. We spent the whole night playing baccarat and drinking champagne that costs more per bottle than most people make in a week. Private casino. Baccarat. $1,000 champagne. All paid for with stolen money. All documented on credit card statements that were currently sitting in Agent Rivera's evidence files. And you know what the crazy part is? She asked, leaning forward like she was about to share some profound revelation. I was good at it. The gambling, the lifestyle, all of it. It was like I'd finally found my natural element. Her natural element was apparently felony fraud, but I wasn't about to point that out. Brandon said I have the instincts of someone who was born for that world, she continued. He said most people would have been intimidated, but I just belonged there. Brandon said, always Brandon. The man who had somehow materialized the exact moment my wife decided she deserved a more expensive life. The man who had been conveniently available for every illegal purchase, every stolen moment, every fraudulent transaction. Where's Brandon now? I asked, because I couldn't help myself. For the first time since she'd started talking, Jasmine's expression flickered. Just for a second, something that might have been uncertainty crossed her face. He had some business to take care of, she said, her voice losing just a tiny bit of its confident edge. But he said he'd call soon. He said this was just the beginning. Just the beginning. If only she knew how right Brandon was about that. Because while Jasmine thought this was the start of her new luxury lifestyle, I knew it was actually the beginning of the end of her freedom. Every word she'd just spoken was recorded. Every detail she'd shared was already corroborated by digital evidence. Every photo she'd shown me was time-stamped and geotagged. She'd just spent 3 hours building the prosecution's case against her, one incriminating detail at a time. And tomorrow, Agent Rivera would knock on our door with handcuffs and federal charges, ready to show Jasmine exactly what kind of upgrade she'd really earned. There's something poetic about the timing of federal law enforcement. They don't just show up randomly. They plan these things with the precision of a Swiss watch and the dramatic flair of a Hollywood screenplay. Agent Rivera had told me they'd come the next evening, right around dinner time, when most people are relaxed and off guard. What he didn't tell me was that they'd time it perfectly for maximum psychological impact. It was 7:43 p.m. on a Friday when destiny came knocking, literally. Jasmine had spent the entire day in what I can only describe as post-vacation bliss mode. She'd been lounging around the apartment in a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, occasionally FaceTiming her friends to show off her designer purchases and casually mentioning her amazing trip with Brandon. She'd also been trying to reach Brandon all day. I'd watched her call him at least 6 times, each call going straight to voicemail, each unanswered text message making her just a little more agitated. But she was doing that thing people do when they don't want to admit something's wrong, pretending everything was perfectly fine while the cracks started showing around the edges. "He's probably just busy with work stuff," she'd said after the 4th failed call, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. You know how entrepreneurs are, always dealing with some crisis or opportunity. Entrepreneurs. Sure, that's definitely what Brandon was. At 7:30, Jasmine had decided to take a bath. "I'm going to recreate that amazing spa experience from Monaco," she'd announced, disappearing into our bathroom with a bottle of wine and what looked like half of Sephora's inventory. The sound of running water and her off-key humming drifted through the apartment while I sat in the living room, checking my phone every 30 seconds. Agent Rivera had texted at 7:35, ETA 10 minutes. Hope she's home. She was definitely home, and she was about to get the surprise of her lifetime. At exactly 7:43 p.m., 3 sharp knocks echoed through our apartment. Not the casual knock of a neighbor or the rapid-fire knock of a delivery driver, but the kind of authoritative, official knock that makes your stomach drop even when you haven't done anything wrong. I knew who it was, obviously, but I still felt my heart rate spike as I walked to the door. This was it. The moment when Jasmine's luxury fantasy collided headfirst with federal reality. I opened the door to find Agent Rivera flanked by 2 other officers, a stern-looking woman in a dark suit, and a guy who looked like he moonlighted as a linebacker for the NFL. All 3 had that unmistakable federal agent presence that somehow manages to fill up an entire doorframe. "Evening, Marcus," Rivera said with a slight nod. He was wearing his serious face, the one I'd seen him use during corporate interrogations. "Is Jasmine Hill home?" "Right in there," I said, gesturing toward the bathroom where the sound of splashing water and Jasmine's terrible singing was still echoing. "She's, taking a bath." Rivera's expression didn't change, but I caught the slightest hint of amusement in his eyes. Because of course Jasmine would be living it up in a bubble bath when the FBI came to arrest her. The woman's timing was as terrible as her criminal skills. "Could you ask her to come out here, please?" the female agent asked. Her voice had that no-nonsense quality that suggested this wasn't really a request. I walked to the bathroom door and knocked. "Jasmine, could you come out here for a minute? There are some people here to see you." "Marcus." Her voice carried a note of confusion mixed with annoyance. "What people? I'm trying to relax here. Just put on a robe and come out, okay? It's important." I heard water splashing, followed by some creative cursing that would have made a sailor blush. A few minutes later, the bathroom door opened and Jasmine emerged in her silk robe, hair wrapped in a towel, looking like she was about to lecture me about the importance of her self-care time. "Marcus, what the hell is so important that you?" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the 3 federal agents standing in our living room, their badges clearly visible. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might actually faint. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen, water dripping from her hair onto our hardwood floor. "Jasmine Hill." Agent Rivera stepped forward, his voice official and courteous. Ah, yes. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Rivera held up his badge. I'm Special Agent Carlos Rivera, FBI Financial Crimes Division. These are Agent Martinez and Agent Thompson. You're under investigation for financial fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of federal training systems. The words hit her like a physical blow. I watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and the first hints of panic. Wait, what? She stammered, looking between the agents and me like someone was going to tell her this was all an elaborate prank. This is a mistake. There has to be some kind of mistake. No mistake, ma'am, Agent Martinez said, pulling out a folder thick with documents. We have extensive evidence of fraudulent transactions totaling approximately $90,000, made using a credit card registered to your husband's cybersecurity business. But that's impossible, Jasmine protested, her voice getting higher with each word. Marcus gave me that card. He wanted me to have a nice vacation. Tell them, Marcus. All three agents turned to look at me. Agent Rivera raised an eyebrow, giving me the floor. I looked at my wife, really looked at her for probably the first time in months. Standing there in her expensive robe, surrounded by her stolen designer bags, facing federal agents because she'd been too greedy and too stupid to realize she was stealing a fake credit card. Actually, Jasmine, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, I never gave you anything. That card you stole? It wasn't real. It was a dummy card used for fraud training. But the charges? Those were very real. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next apartment. Jasmine stared at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. You're lying, she whispered. You're lying. This has to be some kind of joke. Agent Rivera stepped forward again. Mrs. Hill, every transaction made with that card was monitored and recorded by federal fraud detection systems. We have timestamps, geolocation data, hotel security footage, and extensive social media documentation of your activities in Paris, Barcelona, and Monaco. No, Jasmine said, shaking her head violently. No, no, no. Marcus, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission. I shook my head slowly. I can't do that, Jasmine. Because it wouldn't be true. That's when she screamed. Not a scream of fear or anger, but the kind of primal scream that comes from someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. You're my husband, she shrieked, pointing at me with a trembling finger. You're supposed to protect me. You're supposed to be on my side. I looked at her standing there, desperate, panicked, facing federal charges for crimes she'd committed while thinking she was smarter than everyone around her. You chose Brandon and the bracelets, Jasmine, I said quietly. Now own it. The next few weeks played out like the world's most satisfying episode of Cops, except instead of watching some random criminal get their comeuppance, I had front row seats to my own wife's spectacular fall from grace. Jasmine spent her first night in federal custody crying, screaming, and demanding to call her lawyer, apparently forgetting that criminal defense attorneys cost money, and she'd already blown through $90,000 of stolen funds on designer bags and European vacations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. The phone calls started the next morning. First, it was her sister, completely hysterical. Marcus, what happened? The news is saying Jasmine was arrested for fraud. This has to be a mistake. Then her mother called, equally panicked, but somehow managing to make it my fault. How could you let this happen, Marcus? How could you not know what your own wife was doing? But my personal favorite was the call from her college roommate, who'd apparently seen Jasmine's mugshot on some crime blog and wanted to know if the European vacation photos were real. Because if they are, she said, that's kind of impressive, even if it was illegal. Tanya, meanwhile, was having the time of her professional life. Marcus, she said during one of our strategy sessions, I've been practicing law for 12 years, and I've never seen a case this airtight. She literally documented her own crimes on social media. The prosecution is probably going to use this as a teaching case. Agent Rivera confirmed as much when he called to update me on the investigation. Your wife's social media accounts are like a real-time confession, he said. We've got her on camera making fraudulent purchases, bragging about stolen money, and even providing timestamps for when specific crimes were committed. Defense attorneys are going to study this case for years as an example of what not to do. The arraignment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I wasn't required to be there, but Tanya convinced me to attend. You need to see this, she said. You need closure. Walking into that courthouse felt surreal. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been a guy with marriage problems. Now I was a federal witness in a fraud case against my own wife. The transformation was so complete, I almost felt like a different person. Jasmine looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit. The designer clothes were gone, replaced with standard-issue county jail attire that made her look like exactly what she was, a criminal. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her makeup was long gone, and the confident, entitled woman who'd bragged about her European adventure had been replaced by someone who looked scared and desperate. When she saw me in the gallery, she mouthed "please" and pressed her hand against the glass partition. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the $90,000. The lies. Brandon. The casual way she dismissed our entire marriage while bragging about her upgrade. The prosecutor laid out the charges with methodical precision. Financial fraud. Identity theft. Unauthorized access to federal training systems. Each count carried serious prison time, and there were a lot of counts. Jasmine's public defender, a tired-looking guy who'd clearly drawn the short straw, tried to argue for bail reduction. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record and strong ties to the community. The prosecutor shot that down immediately. Your Honor, the defendant used stolen funds to travel internationally and has demonstrated a clear willingness to flee the jurisdiction. She also has documented connections to accomplices who remain at large. Accomplices. They meant Brandon, who had apparently vanished into thin air the moment the FBI started asking questions. Turns out when your sugar mama gets arrested for federal crimes, the romance tends to cool off pretty quickly. The judge denied bail reduction. Jasmine would remain in custody until trial. That's when she broke. Right there in open court, she started sobbing and screaming my name. Marcus, Marcus, please, don't let them do this to me. I'm your wife. You have to help me. I sat there watching her fall apart, remembering all the times she'd complained about our boring life, all the times she'd compared me to other men, all the times she'd made me feel like I wasn't good enough for her standards. The bailiff had to physically restrain her as they led her back to her cell. 3 days later, her lawyer called with a deal. The prosecution was offering a plea agreement, full restitution, 18 months in federal prison, 3 years probation, and permanent destruction of her credit rating. She wants to take it, Tanya told me. Her attorney says going to trial would be suicide. They have too much evidence. What about Brandon? I asked. Still in the wind. But they'll find him eventually. Guys like that always surface somewhere. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Jasmine would formally admit guilt to all charges and accept responsibility for her crimes. I decided not to attend. I'd seen enough. Instead, I spent that Friday afternoon signing divorce papers in Tanya's office, while Jasmine officially became a convicted felon. The paperwork was surprisingly simple. When your spouse is in federal prison for stealing your money, divorce proceedings tend to be pretty straightforward. How do you feel? Tanya asked as I signed the last document. I looked around her office, then out the window at the city below. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. Free, I said. I feel free. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for my entire life to transform from married cybersecurity consultant to divorced federal witness. And honestly, those 3 weeks felt like the longest and shortest period of my entire existence. Long because every day brought new revelations about just how deep Jasmine's deception had gone, and short because everything was happening so fast I barely had time to process it all. The plea deal went through exactly as Tanya had predicted. Jasmine stood before Judge Patricia Morrison in federal district court, wearing the same orange jumpsuit that had become her new uniform, and formally admitted to multiple counts of financial fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access to federal training systems. Her voice was barely audible as she answered, "Guilty, Your Honor," to each charge, and I watched from the gallery as the woman I'd once thought I'd spend my life with officially became a convicted felon. The sentencing details were exactly what her lawyer had warned her about. 18 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised probation, full restitution of all stolen funds, and a permanent criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Her credit score, which had once been decent enough to qualify for our joint mortgage, was now permanently destroyed. She'd never qualify for a business loan, a decent apartment lease, or probably even a decent job once she got out. But here's the part that really got me, the restitution order. Because while Jasmine had stolen $90,000 from what she thought was my personal account, the money had actually come from my business fraud training budget, money that was insured by the federal program I worked with. So technically, she hadn't just stolen from me. She'd stolen from the U.S. government. And the government, as it turns out, really doesn't like it when people steal from them. The final restitution amount came to $127,000. Not just the $90,000 she'd spent, but additional penalties, court costs, and interest. Money she obviously didn't have and wouldn't have for years, if ever. The government had already frozen what little remained in her personal accounts, about $300 and some loose change, and placed liens on anything of value she owned, which, as it turned out, wasn't much beyond the designer bags and jewelry she'd bought with stolen money, all of which had been seized as evidence. Agent Rivera called me the day after sentencing to give me the final rundown. She'll be transferred to a minimum security facility in upstate New York next week, he said. Probably Danbury. It's where they send most of the white-collar criminals. What about Brandon? I asked, because I'd been wondering about her mysterious accomplice ever since the arrest. Rivera's voice took on a note of satisfaction. We found him. Turns out, Brandon the entrepreneur was actually Brandon Walsh from Queens, and his business ventures consisted entirely of romance scams and investment fraud. He'd been running the same con on at least 6 other women across 3 states. Your wife was just his latest mark. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Brandon hadn't been Jasmine's boyfriend. She'd been his victim. He'd identified her as someone desperate for a more luxurious lifestyle, someone married to a guy with access to financial systems, and he'd played her like a violin. The gym membership, the gradual escalation of expensive gifts, the constant talk about deserving better. It had all been a carefully orchestrated setup to get her to steal money that he could then help her spend. He's looking at federal charges in 4 states, Rivera continued. Wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. He'll probably get 10 to 15 years when it's all said and done. But here's the beautiful part. He can't flip on your wife because she was just another victim. She genuinely thought he was her boyfriend. So Jasmine hadn't just destroyed our marriage and thrown away her freedom for some grand romance. She'd done it all for a con man who saw her as nothing more than another payday. The irony was so thick you could have served it as the main course at a dinner party. The divorce proceedings were almost anticlimactic after everything else. When one spouse is a convicted felon sitting in federal prison, property division becomes pretty straightforward. Jasmine got to keep her legal debts and her criminal record. I got to keep everything else, which wasn't much since we'd never been particularly wealthy, but at least I could start over with a clean slate. I kept the apartment, obviously. Jasmine's name was removed from the lease, and suddenly the place felt twice as big and infinitely more peaceful. I also kept our joint savings account, which had about $12,000 left in it after paying for various legal expenses. Not exactly enough to retire on, but sufficient to start rebuilding. The strangest part was how quiet everything became once the legal machinery finished grinding through our lives. For months, I'd been dealing with FBI agents, prosecutors, lawyers, court dates, and media attention, because apparently cybersecurity expert's wife steals fake credit card was newsworthy enough to make the local crime blogs. Then suddenly, it was all over. Jasmine was in prison. Brandon was in a different prison awaiting his own trial. The case was closed. The divorce was finalized. I was alone in my apartment with nothing but the sound of my own thoughts and the distant hum of New York City traffic. I'd expected to feel angry. I'd prepared for sadness, for regret, for some kind of emotional devastation that would require months of therapy to process. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Real, genuine, uncomplicated peace. I didn't have to wonder where Jasmine was at 3 a.m. anymore. I didn't have to listen to complaints about our basic lifestyle or comparisons to other couples who had more money. I didn't have to watch her scroll through social media, sighing dramatically at other people's vacation photos and designer purchases. I didn't have to pretend I didn't notice the way she looked at other men, or the way she talked about Brandon, or the way she'd started treating our marriage like it was some kind of consolation prize. For the first time in probably 2 years, I could just exist. Without drama, without walking on eggshells, without constantly wondering if my wife was planning to leave me for someone with a bigger bank account. Tanya came over the evening after the divorce was finalized, bringing Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Jasmine's monthly commissary allowance. "So," she said, settling onto my couch with a container of lo mein, "how does it feel to be a free man?" I thought about it for a moment, looking around the apartment that was now entirely mine. Jasmine's expensive skincare products were gone from the bathroom. Her designer clothes were no longer cluttering the bedroom. Her constant background noise of complaints and dissatisfaction had been replaced by blessed silence. She thought she was upgrading, I said finally. All that time, she thought she was trading up from her boring husband to some exciting new life with Brandon and his money. And now she's in federal prison wearing orange jumpsuits and eating mystery meat, Tanya observed. While Brandon's in a different federal prison, probably getting his ass kicked by actual criminals who don't appreciate romance scammers. "You know what the really crazy part is?" I asked. "I think I'm grateful." Tanya raised an eyebrow. "Grateful? For having your wife steal 90 grand and run off with a con man." "Grateful that she showed me who she really was," I clarified. "Grateful that she was stupid enough to steal a fake credit card instead of a real one. Grateful that I found out now instead of 10 years from now, when we had kids and a mortgage and even more complicated finances." I poured myself another glass of wine and continued. "Think about it. If she'd been smarter, if she'd actually managed to steal real money and get away with it, I'd probably still be married to her. Still wondering why I felt so miserable all the time. Still making excuses for why our relationship felt so empty. She did me a favor by being a criminal. She solved a problem I didn't even know I had." Tanya clinked her glass against mine. "To Jasmine," she said with a grin, "the world's most incompetent criminal and accidentally the best thing that ever happened to your love life." "To Jasmine," I agreed. "May she enjoy her 18 months of government-provided housing and learn to appreciate the simple things in life." And for the first time in years, that felt like an upgrade worth celebrating. 6 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment in Brooklyn Heights, watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and orange, and I couldn't help but laugh at how completely my life had transformed. Not the bitter laugh of someone who'd been screwed over, but the genuine, from-the-belly laugh of someone who'd accidentally won the lottery by losing everything he thought he wanted. The new place was a one-bedroom with exposed brick walls, hardwood floors that actually gleamed instead of looking perpetually dusty. And this was the kicker, a view of the harbor that made me feel like I was living in a movie. It cost less than the old apartment I'd shared with Jasmine, mainly because I wasn't splitting the bills with someone who thought basic cable was beneath her dignity and insisted we needed premium everything. Moving had been therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Every box I packed was like shedding another layer of a life that had never really fit me anyway. Out went the expensive throw pillows that Jasmine had insisted would elevate the space. Out went the designer coffee table that cost more than my first car and served no purpose except to make me afraid to actually use it. Out went all the aspirational crap we'd accumulated because Jasmine thought it made us look more successful to visitors who never actually came over. What I kept could fit in a single moving truck. My computer equipment, my books, my vinyl record collection that Jasmine had always complained was taking up too much space, and my grandmother's dining room table that had somehow survived both the Great Depression and my marriage. Everything else either went to charity or got sold on Craigslist to pay for the deposit on my new place. The painting was the best part. I'd never realized how much I hated the color scheme of our old apartment until I was free to choose something different. Jasmine had insisted on beige walls because they were timeless and sophisticated, which I now understood was code for boring as hell but safe. My new place had an accent wall in deep blue, a color that Jasmine would have dismissed as too bold, but that made me smile every time I walked into the room. I'd also started traveling, something Jasmine and I had talked about but never actually done because she insisted that if we were going to travel, it had to be done right, meaning first-class flights, 5-star hotels, and restaurants that required reservations months in advance. Since I couldn't afford to travel right, we'd just not traveled at all. Turns out, traveling wrong is actually pretty amazing. My first trip was to Colorado in March, a solo hiking adventure that cost less than one of Jasmine's designer handbags and gave me more satisfaction than anything we'd ever done together. I stayed in a cabin that was basically a glorified shed, ate gas station sandwiches for lunch, and spent 3 days walking through mountains that made Manhattan's skyline look like a collection of Lego blocks. The pictures I took were nothing like Jasmine's carefully curated Instagram posts. No designer outfits, no champagne glasses, no strategic poses designed to make other people jealous. Just me, looking genuinely happy for the first time in years, standing on a mountain peak with snow in my hair and mud on my boots. Then came the weekend in New Orleans in April, where I ate beignets for breakfast, listened to street jazz until 2 a.m., and had conversations with complete strangers about everything from cybersecurity to the best places to get coffee. Jasmine would have hated every minute of it, the crowds, the noise, the complete lack of luxury amenities. For me, it was perfect. May brought a long weekend in Austin, where I discovered that barbecue and live music were apparently my love languages. June was a camping trip in upstate New York where I learned I could actually cook decent meals over a campfire, and that sleeping in a tent was surprisingly comfortable when you weren't sharing it with someone who complained about everything from the temperature to the sound of crickets. Each trip taught me something new about who I was when I wasn't trying to live up to someone else's expectations. I liked dive bars more than cocktail lounges. I preferred hiking boots to dress shoes. I actually enjoyed talking to people instead of just sitting there, while Jasmine dominated every conversation with stories about her gym friends or complaints about our neighbors. Work got better too. Without the constant background stress of wondering what Jasmine was unhappy about now, I found I could actually focus on projects that interested me. I started taking on more consulting work, expanding my fraud training programs, and even speaking at cybersecurity conferences. My reputation in the industry, which had been solid but unremarkable, started growing as word spread about my expertise in financial fraud detection. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jasmine's crime had actually advanced my career. The case study of how someone could steal a training credit card and document their own federal crimes on social media became legendary in cybersecurity circles. I turned it into a presentation called "When Training Systems Catch Real Criminals" that was now requested at conferences across the country. Every time I told the story to a room full of security professionals, I watched them go through the same progression. Disbelief, amazement, and finally laughter at the sheer absurdity of it all. My favorite part was always the Q&A session, when someone inevitably asked, "But didn't you feel bad about letting your own wife get arrested?" "She made her choices," I'd answer. "I just documented them." The money situation improved dramatically too. Without Jasmine's expensive tastes draining our accounts, I discovered I was actually pretty good at saving money. The $12,000 from our joint account had grown to nearly $30,000 through a combination of careful budgeting, increased consulting income, and the simple fact that I no longer felt pressured to spend money on things I didn't want to impress people I didn't like. I'd even started dating again, though casually and without any pressure to find the one immediately. Turns out, when you're not desperate to prove your worth to someone who's already decided you're inadequate, dating becomes a lot more fun. I'd had coffee with Sarah, a librarian who shared my love of terrible action movies. Dinner with Maria, a teacher who made me laugh until my sides hurt. A hiking date with Jennifer, who could identify birds by their calls and taught me the difference between a red-tailed hawk and a Cooper's hawk. None of these relationships had turned into anything serious yet, but that was okay. For the first time in my adult life, I was enjoying the process of getting to know people without immediately wondering if they were relationship material or if I was impressive enough to keep their attention. The best part was that none of them compared me to other men. None of them sighed dramatically while scrolling through social media. None of them made me feel like I needed to apologize for having a normal job and a normal income and normal interests. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be with someone who actually liked me for who I was instead of seeing me as a project to be improved or a stepping stone to something better. About once a month, I got updates on Jasmine's situation through Tanya, who stayed in touch with the federal prosecutor's office. Jasmine was adjusting poorly to prison life, apparently. She'd filed multiple complaints about the food, the accommodations, and her fellow inmates. She'd also written several letters to the warden requesting special accommodations due to her sensitive nature and her previous lifestyle. The requests were denied, obviously. Federal prison doesn't offer room service or designer jumpsuits. Brandon, meanwhile, had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges in 4 states. His romance scam operation had been extensive, targeting vulnerable women across the country and bilking them out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jasmine had actually been one of his smaller victims. The FBI had recovered some of the money he'd stolen from other women, but Jasmine's $90,000 was long gone, spent on the European vacation that had ultimately led to both of their arrests. She would still owe the full restitution amount when she got out, plus interest, plus the cost of her supervision during probation. In other words, she'd be paying for those designer handbags for the next 20 years. I'd received exactly one communication from Jasmine since her incarceration, an email sent through the prison system about 3 months after her sentencing. The subject line was, "I'm sorry," and the message was short but revealing. "Marcus," it read, "I know what I did was wrong. I was confused and stupid, and I let someone manipulate me into thinking I deserved more than what we had. I should have appreciated what we had together. I should have appreciated you. I hope someday you can forgive me." I'd read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. Jasmine was sorry she'd been caught, sorry she was in prison, sorry her plan had backfired so spectacularly. But I didn't get the sense she was actually sorry for the months of lies, the casual disrespect, the way she treated our marriage like a consolation prize while shopping around for someone better. She was sorry for the consequences, not for the choices that led to them. And honestly, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt, wasn't bitter, wasn't even particularly interested in her apology. She'd made her bed, literally, a narrow prison cot in a federal facility, and now she was lying in it. That evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the city lights start to twinkle across the water, I raised my glass to the sunset and whispered the words that had become my personal motto. "Here's to me," I said softly, "the real upgrade." Because that's what this whole experience had taught me. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is losing something you thought you wanted. Sometimes the universe does you a favor by taking away what's wrong so you can finally see what's right. I thought I wanted to save my marriage to Jasmine. What I'd actually needed was to save myself from it. The view from my balcony was spectacular, but the view from my new life was even better.